Hi everyone, this is Craig Zauser back with the second episode of season 14 of the Social Change Career Podcast. Thank you for joining us. I'm here today talking about empowering African NGOs building sustainable careers in resource mobilization with Allwell Akhigbe. For people who have not joined us before, this is a live stream. It generally goes about 1 hour. And we really enjoy hearing from people watching live, particularly on LinkedIn, but also feel free to comment on YouTube. So throughout the episode, please let us know where you're watching from. Feel free to share a little bit about your work. And of course, questions and comments, and we'll try to weave those in as much as possible. This is one of over 170 episodes of the podcast. You can find them at PCN Global/listen and search by theme or subject area. And it's amazing professionals from all over the world doing honest impact career conversations done right, from impact investing to grassroots activism to heads of organizations to tech for social change. 3 quick requests before we start. Again, please feel free to share questions and comments. Please follow Allwell and Trabajo Ensemble on LinkedIn and also share other channels. Please follow PCDN, and if you like the podcast, please consider sharing and or rating it. If you are an avid podcaster or podcast listener, the number one thing you can do for any podcaster is share and particularly rate it, because it just helps to grow the impact. And I'm addicted to podcasts. I mean, too many podcasts, so little time. I mean, I can't listen to all the ones I want, but it's a great way of learning and engaging. So Allwell is a nonprofit fundraising consultant with more than 8 years of experience leading resource mobilization for various international development organizations, including local African nonprofits, international NGOs in their African country offices, and US-based organizations. He has secured millions of dollars in funding from major government donors in the US, UK, and European Union, as well as from UN agencies and American foundations. He is the co-founder and CEO of Trabajo Ensemble, an African-led social enterprise that supports African nonprofits and social enterprises through grant writing, fundraising, strategic planning, business development training, and donor research. He's been doing for almost the past year his weekly LinkedIn series, #fundraise with Allwell. I'll put that in the comments and the show notes. Has reached more than 30,000 nonprofit beneficiaries over, let's say, the past 9 months, democratizing access to actionable fundraising strategies for global South organizations. He holds an MBA from Nexford University and a master's in peace and conflict from the University of Ibadan. I'm based in Medellin, Colombia, all while you're in Abuja, right, in Nigeria. So
Yes,
thank you
yes,
so
I am.
much. Thank you so much for taking time to share your wisdom and insights and reflections. And again, as we're going throughout this, let us know where you're watching from in Allwell. Were you born in Abuja, or are you from another part of Nigeria?
Hi, Craig. Thank you so much for having me. Really delighted to be here. Can you hear me very well, Craig?
Yes, I can. Um, and
Great,
where are?
great. So, yeah,
Go ahead. Oh,
I'm joining in from Abuja, Nigeria.
okay. And so
Yeah,
for people who don't know Nigeria or West Africa, can you share a little bit about what is wonderful about Abuja? You know, what part of Nigeria it's located in, what it's famous for, and what you really appreciate about it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, Abuja is really, really exciting. It's the capital of Nigeria. Nigeria is the biggest, most populous Black nation in the world. The home of culture, diversity, a lot of entertainment, and a whole lot of development across Africa and across the Black nations of the world. So I like Abuja a lot because it's really cool. It's calm. There's a healthy mix of both people are from across Nigeria and also a couple of people from around the world as well. The people are welcoming. The weather is serene. When you do get into Nigeria, typically you would want to go to Lagos, which is like the bustling commercial capital in Nigeria, and where there's like the seat of our entertainment and music and dance and Afro beats and all of that. But Abuja is really a lot calmer, and I think it's just more suited to my temperament, basically. But back to your question, I was born, or I come from another state in Nigeria, in the southern part. It's called Edo State.
Mhm.
It's a bit farther from here. It's close to Lagos, though, closer to Lagos than Abuja. But yeah, if you haven't been to Nigeria, you definitely should make it sometime soon and check out Lagos, check out Abuja as well.
Okay. Thank you so much. I've only been to East Africa. I have not been fortunate enough to make it to Nigeria yet. So if
Mhm.
we think back to your younger years when you know, were in high school or when you started to think about the type of work you or change you might want to work on, did you have any particular expectations or family expectations that you might be a lawyer, a doctor, a business person, a politician, or how and when did you first get involved in social change work? And you know, what were some of your
Yeah.
first initiatives?
hmm Thanks, Craig. No, not by some stretch. I didn't think immediately that I'll get into at least what I do right now, which is resource mobilization for nonprofits. Well, I did have like some very interesting formative experiences in my childhood. One of them was in early 2000s, around 2002, when my dad bought us a BBC dictionary. So this dictionary was like really big. It was like 2,000 plus pages, and I went page by page through the dictionary looking for countries, finding entries on various countries. I found like more than 150 plus, I think. And then I would go through them, check out their capitals, languages, largest cities, and basically memorize them. So yeah, I did memorize virtually all the countries in the world from the early 2000s, and it just got really fascinating for me, like learning about different cultures, learning about the capitals, learning about what differentiated people from each other, and then just really seeing the world for what it is, a very exciting global village. So I recall that when my cousins came around, and those ones were already in universities, and I was just about to start my high school, and then they were like, "Hey, oh well, what do you think you want to study in school, and what kind of career will you want to pursue?" I said, "I'm not very sure exactly what kind of career I would like to pursue, but I would want it to be something that involves countries and capitals, or getting to know people from different cultures, or moving around, and all of those kinds of things." And so, yeah, that impression struck with me. And eventually, I ended up studying international studies and diplomacy, and then went on to get a master's degree in peace and conflict studies. So that particular experience was one that kind of let me know that, hey, I wanted to do something across borders, something connecting people, and then working on issues that affect all of us, but in various interesting ways. Another experience I had was also in this was like 2001, and then yeah, I was growing up in the north central part of Nigeria, in Jos precisely, and it was a really great place. A lot of tourists from the US, from various parts of Europe. It was more like like a major melting pot in Nigeria. But unfortunately, in 2001, it just kind of erupted in violence, and which was very strange for me because that was like my first experience in really experiencing like physical conflict. And what brought it home for me was it was like an inter-ethnic and inter-religious violence. And so I did see how, even though in our area, in our neighborhood, we're really very close knit, but I saw how, because of religious differences, people kind of turned on each other and eventually went out to cause physical harm. So it struck with me, and then it made me feel. And as I grew up, unfortunately, a couple of violent experiences continue to happen in Jos up till this time. But as I grew up and got into my first degree, and I decided that I really wanted to do something, learn about how to build peace in local communities, and also how to make a difference in whatever sphere that I was in. So that particular experience led me. So I would say like the first experience led me to my first degree, which is like international relations, learning about countries, how they work, how the world operates, and all of those kinds and those relations that kind of bind us. And then the second one led me to do my master's degree in peace and conflict studies, and eventually launched me into a career in international development, starting from like youth-led peace building. So let me stop
Wonderful.
here and maybe turn it over to you.
Okay. Wonderful. And greeting Isolde from Armenia, Ms. Desta from Ethiopia, Rwanda. Please keep letting us know where you're watching from. And a couple of people have already said they're in business development, so they're really interested to hear your insights. So I'm curious, did you ever think about becoming a cartographer? You know, because since you like capital so much, or I'm curious, um, um, you know, what is your
No,
favorite? What is your favorite name of the capital in the world? You know, do you have like a favorite capital name? Or one that you think most
I mean,
people
the
don't?
ones that,
Go ahead.
yeah, well, the ones that stuck with me from what 20 23 years ago. So one of them is Christmas Island. I was surprised to hear like there's a place called Christmas Island. And this is just coming randomly from my head now. I haven't given it a thought in like the last 20 plus years. But I recall that when I memorized it, the capital is or was Flying Fish Cove. So that's the capital now. And it was
Okay.
just like, hey, why is the place called Christmas? And wherever is this kind of place. Eventually, I ended up taking a lot of interest in studying maps. I recall that I almost had like the map of the US, like the 50 states in the US. I almost had it nailed down, not necessarily in terms of where they were, but like in terms of the locations and also the map of the UK as well. I had like one old atlas that I used to use to look at that. So okay, actually, I wanted to become an ambassador. Actually, yeah, that reminds me, an ambassador of Nigeria to China at first, but then to France eventually because I ended up spending like 15 years of my life learning French and working across Francophone speaking Africa, West Africa as well, etc. Well, yeah, I think almost after learning those countries and capitals, I figured that okay, I wanted to be at the head of helping my country like really forge stronger relationships with those with whichever countries that were available. So being an ambassador was my first love. I'm not
You,
sure if I can
you,
still get back to that, but
I mean, you're younger than I am, so I think it still could be a possibility. Obviously, it depends on, every country is different. Some countries becoming an ambassador, has a lot to do with your civil service, and other countries has a lot to do with your political or financial connections. But welcome. We have people
Mhm.
from New York and all over, and this is just one capital story. Then we'll move on to the podcast. But I grew up in New York State, and it's funny because I think most people don't know that New York City is not the capital of New York State. It's Albany. And so I imagine you might know that, but it's just funny because a lot of people assume, New York City is the capital. And actually, Kingston was the first capital of New York State. It's a small city, upstate New York, and Albany is pretty close by. Anyway, so can you talk a
Nice.
little bit some of the work you did either post bachelor's or post master's in terms of your first type of paid employment or consultancy? Was it for INGOs, African or Nigerian organizations and business sector? And both kind of what you started off doing and for tips, it's a really hard job market. Obviously, the insanity of US policy right now is having a devastating impact all over the world, for tens of millions of people in terms of basic services, but also tens of thousands of people losing their jobs. So if you think back to when you first started your professional career, where did you wind up and how did you land those roles, and any advice for people? I mean, the average age of our listenership tends to be more 35 to 40, but we have people all different ages. So any advice for people who are looking to maybe at the beginning of their career?
Mhm. Thanks, Craig. Yeah, so maybe I'll take my career about 10 years back, really from like 2015. I would say I got my first steps in youth led development, particularly peace building. In 2015, I left Nigeria to work for a couple of months in a neighboring country in West Africa, in Benin. And that's really kind of sparked my interest in French language. I was working with the Red Cross, promoting a blood donation campaign in universities in Porto Novo. I was also working and enabling businessmen to also improve. I was doing like English literature or literacy classes basically for civil servants and businessmen, French speaking businessmen, etc. Then eventually, I would say I kind of did maybe like a detour into academia. So I started my master's degree in peace and conflict studies, and that kind of like took me around into a lot of graduate research. So my focus was on regional integration in West Africa, cross-borderland cooperation and conflict and cross-border agencies. So that was the majority of my research. So a lot of presentations across Africa and in Europe. And at some point, I did feel like I kind of had like a future in academia, yeah, like in maybe pushing out, not really like in the lecturing part, but maybe like in terms of the research part and just really unearthing findings around peace building, etc. But again, I kind of recall that second experience I talked about from my childhood, like witnessing that violence growing up. And towards the ending of my master's degree, this was like 2017. I now got in touch with a couple of my peers, alumni too, from my master's class that were looking to quickly get into this space and try to actually work on issues around countering violent extremism, around peace building, youth. youth and peace education and all of those kinds of things. So I got involved with them, and that kind of like literally very, I would say, like more or less formally brought me into like international development and working with youth-led NGOs. At first, I was focused on the research part, which kind of like flows from my focus on as a graduate researcher. I mean, peace building. But eventually, I quickly found out that while doing the research and all of that was nice, but most from time to time they began tasking me with the responsibility of writing grants for funding for us to be able to secure some small scale micro grants to be able to do one or two interesting work in terms of organizing conferences, in terms of publishing books on the youth led impact of our of peace builders across Nigeria and across Africa. So I started getting my first break in fundraising, then applying for grants of $2,000, 3,000, very small grants, 5,000, winning those ones, and then just quickly figuring out that hey, this grant writing, resource mobilization is really key to enable organizations to actually thrive, to be able to make an impact in what they are doing. So that kind of just made me transition a little bit from like maybe research and perhaps a potential career in monitoring and evaluation to resource mobilization to fundraising. Then I think that's when I met PCDN. So maybe I should just circle back on that question of how can you tips for you to find jobs, particularly in these very difficult markets with USN development from the US funding space. I would say really join strong communities of practice of people that are working within your sector. So I recall, Craig, that's when I met you and PCDN, and that was like 5 years ago in 2020. And then I had gotten into like an entry level role in fundraising at Search for Common Ground, and then it was a big jump for me, yeah, from applying for grants of like $5,000 to going for stuff of $500,000 and $1 million, supporting other senior fundraisers to go for like $1 million funding opportunities, etc. And then it just kind of really got me into that space of trying to understanding how critical that work is, the work of resource mobilization is, and then it piqued my interest in wanting to stay in this space, to learn a lot more, to be more or less in the background. I'm trying to secure funding, weave relationships that will enable organizations to thrive and make a lot more impact on the ground in terms of where they are at. From there, I did get very fortunate, I like to say blessed, in like really being exposed to various forms of fundraising at various levels for various organizations. So first from the youth-led organization to like an international peace building, and it's an INGO's country office. I moved on to work directly with organizations in fundraising based at their Washington DC headquarters, and also American social enterprises as well. I'm working based in Florida. So thankfully, because of remote work, I was able to get those opportunities. And then that kind of expanded my scope of responsibility. So not just I'm taking on a lot more extensive roles in terms of fundraising, building relationships with donors, doing a lot more capture intelligence, and just really, really understanding those core basics, and also helping to design and implement fundraising strategies. So that really got me. I think it got me on it got me on the path of where I am right now, where I have found that these learnings, this knowledge, this experience is something that is very critical to African NGOs who might not have, African fundraisers who might not have benefited from that experience of working across various subject matter, various audiences and in various capacities. And then how can I try to transfer and democratize access to like this knowledge and this experience for the greater good for a lot more organizations in the global south, which is kind of what I'm trying to do right now at Travail on Some. But if I maybe to cut it short, and maybe just zero back on your question of what tips, I think being multilingual helps for you to be able to find an opportunity to work across organizations, across countries in particular. I have delved B2 intermediate, like high upper intermediate level of proficiency in French, and that was directly related to the reason why I was able to get my first major like fundraising assistant kind of work, supporting fundraising across the Lake Chad basin countries in West Africa, so Nigeria, Niger, Cameroon, Chad. So I really did. It gave me that edge above like all of the other applications. The fact that I had that multilingual experience, Then again, I think if you're looking at landing jobs within this sector, it's really helpful for you to have a very good understanding of research, and also like have some very strong writing skills as well. And most of the work that we're doing, whether it's building relationships with donors, and whether it's writing grant proposals, keeping maybe like doing donor engagement, a lot of that it comes down to how well you write, how well you're able to understand the needs of the other party, and how well you're able to position your organization in a way that's helpful for you to build partnerships. So really good research experience. I mean, good research skills, excellence, written and oral communication skills. It's helpful if you also have if you speak multiple languages. It makes it a lot more attractive to INGOs, and also even African NGOs that are working across various countries. And definitely you should join a community of practice, because I joined PCDN's community in 2020. And since then, it's been incredible. I mean, I've had the pleasure of you, Craig, standing in as a reference for me for one of my INGO jobs. I've gotten a lot of consultancy opportunities, and I keep getting inspired by senior colleagues like yourself, and colleagues in the community across the US, across Europe, across Africa. So it's a safe space for me, and it has been from when I was an early career, professional, to when I would say getting into mid or senior, and mid getting to like senior level career professional. It has been very helpful in shaping my mindset, my abilities, my skills, and letting me know about the opportunities that are available in this sector. So I'll
Thanks.
just, yeah, over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Alva. I hope I'm not too senior. And I learned from everybody. Like, I've learned a lot from you and enjoying, and obviously you're helping so many people and organizations. So questions are starting to come in, but I want to ask one more before we start getting them. And again, welcome people. We have, I'm sorry if I don't remember everyone's name, but a bunch of people from West Africa, Ghana, and Nigeria, Nepal, New York, um, Ethiopia. So please feel free to keep adding your questions, and also share if you want to share links about your work. So two questions here, and I'll just tell a quick story. I've always been involved in social activism, and I was living in Hungary on a fellowship, and a friend and I were in a boring conference on kind of conflict, and we started taking notes. Like, it was a high level conference. We got ourselves invited, and they said, you can come just sit in the back and don't talk, because we were young. And so we started taking note taking about how boring this conference was. And we came up with an idea for an NGO. Hungary has 13 different identity groups. Roma are the largest. I mean, Hungarians are the largest, but in terms of minority groups. So we came with like an idea of doing an organization to bring together all the different identity groups in Hungary, youth, and do conflict resolution programming. And it's funny because we wrote up a proposal, and I had no fundraising experience. I was I was probably a year outside of college. I'd done a lot of stuff, organizing, and we got a meeting with Open Society Foundations in Hungary, which is a good place to look for funding. And we thought they were just going to think about it. And the guy's like, "Hey, I think he took our proposal." And 5 days later, he's like, "Here's some money." And we didn't have an organization. So we got money. Like, we were clueless, but we managed to raise, and we didn't have to pay ourselves because we both were in fellowship, which was great. I love fellowships because if you can have the autonomy if your work or research can match the interest of a fellowship provider, it gives you such autonomy and freedom to do what you really want to do in ways that paid work doesn't always, or volunteer work. So anyway, so we started fundraising, and we're able to do that. And so a question is, how did you go? I mean, you talked about French helping with your first fundraising, but also in Nigeria with your friends. Like, how do you learn to become a seeker of funds, and what is essential to making a pitch? Whether it's $100 or Naira or a million or 20 million, like, obviously things are different, but what are the three or four things for anyone? And then then I'll ask a question about careers and fundraising. Then we'll get into questions from the audience. But like, what is so essential when people think about funding, whether it's investment for a business or a nonprofit, or like, just what is essential that makes a really good pitch or ask?
Mhm. Thanks, Craig. And yeah, delighted to see you got that funding from Soros and Open Society Foundation. Um, a couple of things, yeah, when you're thinking of fundraising, the idea is one of the things I try to do is look beyond like what I have to offer and like what the exact need I have for funding is, and just kind of trying to figure out what is in it for the the funding partner. Yeah, like what's that interest of the funding partner that I can meet in a way that kind of meets my own goals here or my own needs as well. And I think that was one of the reasons why I went on to do an MBA, just to kind of like really see how I can bring in like maybe business insights into like my nonprofit work and kind of really understand how to ensure that various interests are being carried out. I mean, are being brought together, carried out, and all of those kinds of things. So a couple of things I usually do when I'm trying to pitch to a fundraiser is really figure out like what's the return on investment for them. So of course this is nonprofit, so perhaps there isn't that return on investment as like let's say for profits, maybe like financial returns, but then the return on impact for them exactly. So when they support your work, what would they be able to get out of it as a result? To be able to figure that out, you need to do like a lot of research on what their specific needs are at that particular donor. So let's say you are approaching George Soros, for instance, or Open Society Foundations. You would want to know okay, what their current priorities are. If they have like, let's say, a strategic plan that stretches up to, let's say, 2 to 3 years now, or 3 to 5 years. And just kind of figure out like what kind of issues are they interested in over the next couple of years in Hungary, and then how can you what kind of specific approaches would they really like to would they like for you to be able to, I mean, would they like to deploy in addressing those particular challenges? So it always usually starts with like a very strong understanding of what is happening at the other end. After I make that pitch, what is the importance, or what would be the key benefits that the other party should derive? Because yes, there's the donor. I mean, there are donors. Yes, they are moved by their visions and all of those kinds of things. They want to make a difference in the world. But at the core of everything, there's that particular need that they have that you have to uncover. So that's one. Second thing in making that pitch would be what is unique about you. So there are a lot of people, a lot of organizations that are doing very similar work like yours. So how can you kind of different? What's your unique selling proposition? Yeah, how do you differentiate yourself from the tons of competitors around that were doing something similar in your work? So what that means again is you have to do like a lot of research first to really understand, to have a very good grasp of the problem, and then do like a lot of like also figure out your own role in the ecosystem, like what you do or what you bring to complement the efforts that other people are doing, and what is unique about the approach that you want to take in resolving that challenge or that problem. The third thing is a very strong plan on how you want to implement it. I think nowadays what I'm seeing, and it's been coming through in a couple of requirements, both donor proposals and all of those kinds of things, is how are you looking to sustain that? How are you going to implement the work in a way where it doesn't all fall apart if the donor pulls back or if the donor is not able to renew the funding for you? So one thing in terms of that pitch would be how are you looking to continue making the impact of that work after at the expiration of that particular funding support that you get from a particular partner. So in essence, it's sustainability. Are you going to be able to transfer that knowledge to the beneficiaries? Are you going to be able to create some sort of model that enables the work to keep going on? Are you going to create a community of practice or something like that that ensures that even if it's not delivered at the scale at which you would do when the donor was supporting you, but then again, it's something that it's something that keeps going on and the impact continues to double or build up. Then I think finally it would be like in terms of making that pitch, it really would be how well you really understand the needs, or how well you are going to meet the needs of those beneficiaries. So it comes from a strong understanding of what their needs are. It's supposed to meet that is going to, as much as possible, meet that particular need, and even go beyond whatever it is you're promising in terms of the outputs or the outcomes, and then the eventual impact. So I think generally, like for me, I try to kind of think in terms of that logical framework. I know that's a lot more monitoring and evaluation, but the idea is for you to really question why you feel like those activities they are proposing is something that is going to generate and the activities and those outputs, why you think it's something that will generate those intermediates. I mean, trying not to get too technical, but why you think those inputs that you make and the activities will lead to change you're looking to the change you're looking to carry out. If you kind of think of that at the project design phase, then you most likely would have thought things through very thoroughly, and then you'd also try to ensure that all of the aspects of your initial pitch, like if you're putting together a proposal from your goal or your objective, or the goal rather to the objectives, the activities, everything kind of makes a lot of logical sense, and everything is tied to the need of that particular donor, who ideally you would have researched before approaching. So yeah, that's what I would suggest in terms of key aspects of your pitch or your proposal.
Thank you so much. And people are saying lots of great insights and comments. And I've done a lot of fundraising and had some success from from government and foundations and private sector. I'm a master at fellowships too. I really know how to do fellowships, but also I've gotten rejected a lot. So one quick question, and then we'll do one career question, and then please, everyone watching, let us know where you're watching from and more of your questions. So first is, for fellowships, I'll tell a fellowship story. My first fellowship was a Fulbright fellowship, junior, and I did study abroad in Hungary right after the end of the Cold War, and it changed my life. So, and I came back and I had a mentor who was like, apply for a Fulbright. She kept bugging me, and I was like, no, that's for important people. But she was persistent, so mentors are really important. And I listened to her and I applied, and I wound up, and I thought I bombed the interview. I was like the last person of the day. I'm like, I'm never going to get this. And I got it, and I got it for 1 year, and then renewed a second. And that changed my life. I've had lots of other fellowships, and I've been a fellowship advisor, helped hundreds and hundreds of people get fellowships. And Pro Fellow, PCN is a great resource for fellowship, so is Pro Fellow. But I also get rejected from lots of things. And I had a student, I won't say which fellowship, but when I was at Georgetown for 10 years, 9 years, I was on the side just volunteer, a fellowship advisor, one of the fellowships I had. And I had a student come to me. She was like almost crying. She's like, "You're mean," because like her application wasn't good. And I'm not a mean person, but I said, like, often you need to go back 4 to 5 to 6 times to get it until you really learn how to write in the donor, whether it's a fellowship or funding application. It takes a lot of work. And so she came, she was like almost crying. She's like, "I can't do it anymore. You're mean." She did another round and she got the fellowship. So it's like it takes persistence and rejection. And I've probably been rejected from, I don't know, 80% of the fellowships I've applied for, 90% have probably been rejected. And for funding, I've helped start NGOs. I've probably been rejected, as a team. It's usually not just me. 90%, I don't know, like not 100%. So in your mind, I don't want to ask about your ratio, but is there like a number that if someone does a good application, because if it's a bad application or it doesn't match the funder, you're going to get rejected. But if it's a good application, is there any ratio you have in your mind of like it's normal to get 10% and rejected from 90, or like the best development professional in the world can get 30% win, or like is there any industry standard or anything you calculate?
Mhm, mhm. Well, I mean, rejections are part of the job, yeah. They
Uh-huh.
come with the territory, and it's usually very tricky. So, you first thing is to like really know or kind of figure out like why the rejection happened. As much as possible, um, do like a lot of make like some prior preparations to make sure that to reduce the likelihood of getting rejected. So you could be rejected for a lot of reasons. Yeah, it could be because of the competition. It could be even when they score your proposal, you could get up to 90% on various matrices that are used for the proposal, but still, but maybe somebody else could score higher than you, maybe 92 or 93, and then you get rejected. You could get rejected because sometimes some funding can just be pulled off even after you've applied and gone through like various processes. That was the case for with me at some point for one of my clients in East Africa. We had gone through several iterations of the proposal for a UN agency, and then boof, something came up in Sudan, and then everything just fell to pieces because of the war there and all of those kinds of things. You could also be rejected because yeah, maybe the funding is no more available. It's maybe there's not enough. Yeah, maybe there's like a very small quota of people that are going to be able to secure that funding. So irrespective of how good your application is, it falls through the cracks. It's also possible to reject that if you have no prior relationship with the donor. So which is why for me and for my clients, when I find a particular opportunity, I try to be able to, as much as possible, at least introduce ourselves to the program officer at that particular organization, if or just get some form of contact going that lets them know about us prior to when we actually submit the proposal. So because it's proven that once there is that like ongoing or at least a particular existing kind of relationship between yourself and the donor, it will improve the chances of you being able to secure funding. But generally, if you ask me like a good win rate, I would say maybe somewhere between I don't know, 75% to like 80% would be of the applications you make. Ideally, if you are also able to, and again, this is why I kind of also suggest one of the standard operating procedures would be a go no go criteria. So ideally, this is like a set of a mix of various questions that cut across maybe the purpose, your capacity in house, the strategic positioning of that opportunity, if there are any existing relationships between you and the donor. So, ideally, when you find a funding opportunity, it's best for you to actually take it through that go no go criteria to figure out how realistic your chances are of being able to take it on and deliver the project and also be able to secure the funding as well. So, if you do that kind of rigorous matrix to kind of run through all of the funding opportunities you come across, you would end up going for fewer opportunities, but for ones that you stand a higher chance of actually being able to secure eventually. So that's one of the tools that you should actually use prior to going to settling on a particular opportunity. But if you ask me what like a good win rate would be, I would say somewhere around 75 to 80%, simply because there's a lot of stuff that you can't control on the other end after you submit the proposal, and then a lot of other things too as well, a lot of other dynamics that have to play out, either even within your own organization or in the funder, prior to them actually screening applications and making a funding decision, etc. But yeah, the idea is to be a lot more selective of what you go for, and to also try to be a lot more organized about how to go for these opportunities. Some of the reasons for rejection could also be like lack of organization on your part, like a lot of tardiness, a couple of mistakes in maybe your technical proposal, your budget, you not following the donor guidelines, or you trying to get things in on the deadline day, which is something I kind of really insist against. So one way to help you get you organized in working towards your funding application would be to use a proposal calendar. So let's say a proposal was due like February 28th, for instance, and you found out about it today. So it would be about roughly 2 weeks to get to that point. So ideally, you should create like a calendar that sets particular targets or milestones for you as you walk towards developing a proposal. So even if you're bringing like a proposal team, you ensure that proposals on time and make sure that you have enough time as well to review it, review your draft severally in-house. I mean, when you're able to kind of walk in a systematic way towards preparing your proposals and also be very selective about the ones you go for, I mean, it also kind of automatically helps you increase your own win rate
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean,
as
yeah.
well.
So I think for me, I mean, I've often done this in partnership with others.
I don't know if you
Can you hear me? Yes.
got that.
Yes, I did. I heard the last part. So I think often when I do things in teams, often as part of organizations,
Mhm.
we can have a decent success rate, but I've never come anywhere near 75%. I'm not a professional fundraiser. I've worked with, when I've been part of organizations where they have the development people, obviously they probably come closer to 40 to 50, and as an but it's like pick the right proposals, do your work, be organized. And I review a lot of proposals for all different kinds of things. And I will say, as a reviewer, if, as you were saying, if someone just submits a generic proposal, it's not going to even like make it through like the read. It's got to be. I always like to say, whether it's you as an individual organization, it's like why you for this particular opportunity from this organization in this sector, and it's not about you; it's about the donor. I mean, it is about you, and obviously the donor wants to know about you and the communities, organizations working with. But if it's all about you, the donor's just gonna be like, and it has to be customized. And probably 60, once you've done enough proposals, you just have templates. At a certain point, a lot of it can just be templated and customized, but there still always needs to be, the budget, there still always needs to be that whether it's Ford Foundation or, well, USAID's not doing much funding, or, Rockefeller, or, Trust Africa, or whichever organization, it's like, why that organization, understanding their mindset, and, what they're trying to show, because everybody has someone they're accountable to. So if, it's Trust Africa, Open Society, they've got to report to their, head of country or regional, or to their board. So like, what do they want to show? Or what is, if it's a wealthy person who just likes to give away money, like, is it for ego? Is it because they really care? Anyway. So there's a question from Ms. Desta in Ethiopia, and she was just saying she unfortunately got a stop order from USAID for a project they were going to start implementing. And so I guess this is a question, thousands of organizations around the world are struggling with, is what do you recommend when a donor just cuts funding? Let me know if you can hear me. I might have froze for a second. Yeah, you can. What do you recommend when a donor cuts funding, and how, like, your tips? Organizations just need to throw out that idea, or, what are ways? And this is a broader question: how not to become too reliant on any single donor or type of donor. So what are your recommendations in general for diversifying funding? And if you're in a crisis, which, I'm on some advisory boards of organizations, they're in crisis because, a good part of their money comes from USAID. So you're kind of both general advice about diversifying, and when a crisis hits, which, I've been on boards of organizations where it's not a crisis, but they have money through July, and then they don't know if they're going to have any money to pay the staff beyond that. It's stressful, but it's the reality. Let me know if you can hear me. Just wait a second. Oh, well, can you hear? I think it froze for a second. Let me just see. Okay, go ahead, Alwa. I think I can see you now. Did you hear the question? We're having a little bit of technical difficulties. Alwa, let me know if you can hear. I'm going to send him a note. If not, I might ask him to come back in. And while we're waiting, feel free to keep sharing your comments and questions. And let me just message Allwell. I'm sorry for the technical challenge. So while we're waiting, I'll ask him to come back in. While we're waiting, hopefully he'll get back in, because I think it froze for me. Again, we have 170 episodes that you can find on PC and Globe. Oh, well, can you hear me? Because I think we lost you for a while.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Maybe
Like
turn
saying
your...
is a terrible reality.
Yeah, maybe turn your camera off, because let's do it without the camera. Okay, Allwell's going to come back in and come out. So while we're waiting, thank you for joining this episode. We have 170 that you can find on PC and global./listen, or any major podcasting platform. We would really appreciate it if you might consider, I'll be back in about 30 seconds, if you would consider sharing. And then a couple of PCN resources. So we have a free weekly impact newsletter, a twice a week free AI for Impact newsletter, and both of those we human curate amazing jobs, fellowships, upskilling opportunities, news. We have an amazing daily career digest where you can get over 200 human curated opportunities a month in your inbox for less. That one we do charge a little bit to help sustain our work, for less than the cost of a cup of coffee. And so we'll be sending some information on that. And then, this is the beginning of season 14. So we have lots of other episodes coming up. You can just follow me or PCN, or get on our newsletter. And let me just see if Allwell's coming back. Give me 1 second. And while we're waiting, feel free to put in your questions and comments. And thank you for so many people for joining us from all over the world. Again, this podcast episode will be live on the 24th, and our first podcast episode of season 14 will be live tomorrow. That was with Pravin Rodriguez, who's an impact investor from Canada who's doing a lot of work in Latin America and talking about impact careers. So hopefully I will see if Allwell can join us. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to hit refresh and see if he can come back in. And for Miss Desta from Ethiopia, just sending Allwell a message. All right. So it is an insane time, and it is going to be more difficult. And what USAID is doing, is horrific. And so, a couple of thoughts for people who are thinking or dealing with these challenges. First is apologies that obviously all countries in their bilateral aid agencies do part of this work because of their own interests. And so I don't want to say that I've worked on quite a few USAID projects as a contractor, and State Department ones. And so I don't want to say that these are ever done purely for altruistic reasons. Every country has its reasons. And so, but it's horrific to see this intentional cruelty become the new norm. I'll just send me a message. He's going to come back in. It's this intentional cruelty is horrific, and it's impacting millions of people around the world, around health and access to education and basic medical care and shelter, and it's really horrific. And so the three suggestions, and Allwell should be back in about a minute. The three suggestions are one. Let me just see if I can get Allwell back in. One is take a breath, because I'm just finishing it. Thanks, all. I'm just finishing up on a comment that people are asking. So one is take a breath, because this is a horrific situation and it's going to get worse. Second is there's no magic solution for diversifying your donor base, but obviously is talking. If you've got a good board, if you work for a nonprofit, the board sometimes can play a vital role. Sometimes it's more just on governance. A lot of organizations are going to have to cut staff, maybe even shut down. That's the horrific news. But also really think about where, and hearing that the European Union and some of the bilateral donors might step up and try to help support organizations. There are great crowdfunding platforms like Global Giving, where you have to be vetted to get onto Global Giving, but you can set up campaigns, and particularly they're doing a lot of work now. Talk to regional organizations in Africa, Open Society Foundation, Trust Africa. Talk to business foundations, and I've gotten money in the past from local businesses. So if you have an event, but it's going to be, and then join communities. So there are so many communities that are trying to provide support, tactical and moral support. So PCDN, I'll be on a panel on Monday on DevX. Anyway, we'll talk more about this, but Alwa, let me know if you can hear me, and thank you for coming back in. Let's see if you can you hear me now? Maybe turn off your camera, Alwa, just for connection, so we can just hear your voice. Let me know if that works. Yeah, turn off your camera, because turn off the video, because I think it's that way we should be able to hear you better. Sorry, everyone, for the technical and turning off your video. Oh, well, let's see if we can hear you. Go ahead. Yeah. Okay. So, nope. I think apologies, everyone, that we are having these technical challenges. It's part of the reality, even though we live in a globally connected world. Often, even the places with the best internet connection can happen. So Roman is asking a great question. What are the ways forward for us in Africa regarding the reduction in funding? Some other places. Okay, well, let's see if it works. But Roman, your question. Good now? Yes. Okay. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Let's try it now. And for everyone who's
Yeah,
listening,
I can hear you.
okay, good. So for everyone in the
Apologies for that. I'm having some freaking network. Is it?
oh, it's life. For everyone, this will be edited out in the audio podcast. Oh well, there's a lot of questions coming in, and so one is from Ruman. What are
Okay.
the ways forward for us in Africa regarding the reduction funding, specifically keeping my current development at USAID, and how can we in Africa prepare our NGOs and volunteering organizations to sustain their programs and staffs? So there's a lot of those type of questions. So any thoughts about what you're seeing, what you recommend, and where people can go for support?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, correct. Can you hear me better?
I can hear you very well now, so keep going.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I mean, it's really challenging at this point, and I feel like African NGOs are at the receiving end of most of all of these issues, because some INGOs might have a bit more access to diversified funding, and they may be able to pivot accordingly. But African NGOs are kind of hamstrung in the sense that most of them are most likely relying on subcontracts from these INGOs. And then it's a big problem right now when that funding kind of stops. One of the things I've been trying to emphasize is really having to diversify your funding base, and that's something that we need to do a lot more of in the African NGO space, as much as possible. Try to seek or secure funding from a variety of donors in a way that doesn't leave you tied to anyone's apron strings, and in a way that enables you to still be able to ensure your sustainability going forward. So what I would suggest at this point in terms of diversifying is doing a lot of targeted research on what other kinds of organizations are supporting causes like yours, but also kind of trying to divest a little bit from both governments and multilateral organizations. Agencies like UN agencies, they probably are receiving most of their funding from the US government as well. So what that means is their funding wouldn't be very consistent over, I think, the next 1-2 years, as they try to kind of deal with the funding freeze and what that means for them. So what I'm suggesting is a lot more focus on corporations and foundations as well. For corporations, it kind of needs a different tactics to be able to reach out to these ones. These are businesses that are trying to either fulfill their corporate social responsibility, or to also show maybe their ESG goals as well, just to kind of really show that they are supporting local communities in which they working. So for this particular type of donor, this particular donor type, you really have to really demonstrates a lot more rigorous thinking in terms of how your work leads to the impact. And then again, you also have to be able to show them how them partnering with your organization will be able to improve their own brand awareness, their own ability to also improve their market share. I'm afraid that's something you also have to kind of to how this would lead to them achieving their own business goals. So here, more than ever before, you have to be a lot more strategic about that. For foundations, you want to look closely at foundations that are forgetting specific targeted areas across the continent. From my own research and experience, it does look like most of the foundations that may be based in Africa or that have like an Africa focus, they're kind of usually looking towards East Africa and focusing on various kinds of categories, livelihoods, education, health, climate change, girl child development, all of those kinds of stuff. So you want to look closely at which kinds of organizations are funding similar funding teams around your subject matter, and then which ones are funding in terms of geographically. So maybe for those in East Africa, if they're not really funding your specific country, look if they're funding across East Africa, funding teams that are relevant to yours, and then see if there's a way for you to get in there, and get like a slice of that kind of funding. For West Africa, is also the same thing. I think now more than ever before, it's important for you to like really prioritize building relationships with donors. Craig, can you still hear me very well?
Yes,
Great.
I can hear you
Because
perfectly.
there's a lot more pressure on the limited funding that's available. I mean, I've seen a lot of conversations around how philanthropy can step up, particularly in the US, to fill the void. And I also saw what Bloomberg Philanthropies is trying to do, filling in that gap that the Trump administration is creating in terms of funding for climate change. Where in reality, there's very little that those foundations can do in terms of filling the huge gap that has been created by governments. And there's also that challenge of being perceived negatively by the current administration if they try to maybe step up a little bit. So what that means is there's a lot more people, more African NGOs and plus INGOs applying to this CAS funding. And then now more than ever before, they'll be prioritizing funding by invitation. They'll be prioritizing funding selections, or rather invitations to partner. So like funding by invitations only, that's one. And secondly, they'll be prioritizing existing relationships with potential grantees to improve those chances of you securing the funding. So what I would say is over the next 2-3 years, I would expect African NGOs to and again, this is a bit difficult to suggest, knowing that African NGOs typically have a lot more limited funding than than is available to INGOs. But there has to be a lot more focus on cultivating relationships. So first of all, identifying the kind of donors, corporations, foundations that you think would be willing to support you. One, then going into to really build relationships with them. So led by the executive director, supported by whoever it is that is leading your fundraising, you need to be able to cultivate those strong relationships so that eventually, even if you have to apply for like an open call for proposals, you have a higher chance of being able to land the much scarcer funds that are available right now. Finally, I would say there's a role for African philanthropy. African philanthropy has to step up. Typically, it's been coming up little by little over the last couple of years. I mean, but right now there's a big void. And while I don't agree with what the current U.S. president is doing, and I know Craig and a lot of other development professionals in the U.S. they share those views of the ill-timeness of this, and then the fact that this isn't the right thing that needs to be done. It reminds me of some of the things I learned in my first degree in international relations, which is that there is no permanent friend or foe. There's no permanent friend. There's no permanent enemy. The only thing that's permanent is interest. So the current administration thinks it's in the interest of the US to pull back from funding most of the charitable work worldwide. And I'm sure that's not really the case, but that's what they think. So what that simply means is that African NGOs have to begin to look inwards to mobilize those resources from their own businesses, from their own governments, from their own local communities. The resources need to come out from within Africa now more than ever before to enable us to be able to move and make progress and sustain the vital work of these African NGOs. Finally, there has to be a big push towards end income in Africa. I recall the Bridgespan report from last year. There are two reports, one on how American NGOs, they targeted like American INGOs that were earning, that had budgets of more than $50 million and above. And then so the title was how American NGOs got really big, or how American NGOs grew, and then how African NGOs grew. The one for African NGOs was a lot lower, like $5 million annual budgets and above, etc. And what we did see was for the American INGOs that grew really big, even though their major source of funding was governments, but then their second major source was even higher than corporations, or that was higher than foundations, was end income. So they were making sure they were providing services. They were providing services that were earning them income to enable them complement their services. So right now, those kinds of organizations that have like those robust end income models, they might be the ones to be able to successfully weather, at least come out of this storm not totally destroyed at the end of the day. So that's something that has to work out for African NGOs. You have to begin looking at your expertise. What kind of products can you create? What kind of maybe consultancy services can you provide to other nonprofits or other stakeholders within the system? What kind of trainings can you organize that would be paid for by maybe governments or other actors in a way that is able to generate income for you? I understand there's that confusion about, hey, we're a non-profit, but really what that non-profit means is you're not supposed to generate money to be shared by the owners or by the board members or by the shareholders the way for-profit would do. You are able to generate income to sustain your operations, which is more critical now than ever before. So that is a model that I don't see a lot of, and then obviously individual giving as well. I see that there's a lot of robust individual giving campaigns, not just during Giving Tuesday, for instance, for Western INGOs, but also like during end of the year fundraising campaigns, throughout the year that start from, like, let's say from October or from early November down to maybe first or second week of January. I don't see a lot of it by African NGOs, but right now we need to begin to take advantage of those kinds of alternative sources of income, because I mean, statistics are, and I know, Craig, you're at the top of gathering some of the statistics of jobs that are being lost and all of that. But I really fear for the future of, I don't know, tens of thousands of African NGOs, if they might be able to survive this, and to be able to survive this kind of earthquake, I would say, in the sector. We need to be able to transform the resource mobilization approaches, and in summary, that includes a lot of diversity to focus on. Obviously, we can also do like some focus on European donors, but again, we also see European donors pulling back as well, cutting back their aid. Netherlands, Sweden, the UK. So there has to be like a lot more end income push, a lot more individual giving, tapping into African philanthropy, and also and also end income philanthropy, all of these ones, and then corporations and foundations as well. Over to you, Craig.
Thanks so much, Alwell. Really good suggestions, and a bunch more questions came in. I just want to say two things on this topic. So first, like PCN is a for-profit. We don't make any profit, but I've started nonprofits, been on the boards, and I got tired of the chasing the donor model. There's so much broken with the world, because there's enough money to address most of the challenge. I won't say solve, but address. And so if we actually used all, inequality is getting worse than ever. If you look at Oxfam reporting and others, and we need $2 or $3 trillion a year to get closer to meeting most of the SDGs. We're so far behind from that, and the global economy is 90 trillion. So there's enough money in the world to make things better for a lot of people. I won't say solve. Our systems are not set up that way. So part of it's political economy, part of it's power, part of it's wealth. I got tired of applying for funding, and we were reasonably successful. One of the NGOs I helped start, we got up to 400,000 in revenue, and then I went full time, and then it was full time work for half-time pay with no benefits, and there was no one to blame. There was only 6 of us, and I just burned out trying to get funding. So just acknowledge, to me, there's so much broken with the industry, regardless if you're in the global majority or wherever. It's just such a weird system. I call it the projectification of social change. Anyway, but 2 is, earned income is not a magic solution, and especially it will not magically transform if your budget went from 100,000 euros to 10,000 overnight. It's not, but trying to explore where you can do things that don't detract from your mission can help. And some organizations, I'm friends with someone here who's got, helped start an NGO. It's one of the best in Latin America, and they're spinning out a commercial arm because they piloted something. And it's going to become a separate for-profit where revenue will go back and help the nonprofit. That can work sometimes. And so there's a question here that just came in. Well, I recently read one of your insightful newsletter publications where you emphasize the importance of NGOs. I think you're on twice, Alwell. Hold on a second. Oh, well, I think you're in the system twice. Which one do you want? Can you log out for one of them? I see you twice for some reason. So I recently read one of your insightful. Let me bring them in the other one. Okay. Okay. Well, I recently read one of your insightful newsletter publications where you emphasize the importance of NGOs adopting earned income strategies. I'm curious, could you share more thoughts on that, and both the opportunities and challenges? So 1 is in general, and then 2 is, Bridgespan has great resources, Trust Africa, but where do you go to find, where's the community you recommend going to also understand, the pros and the cons of this? So let me know if you can hear me all well. Let's see. Go ahead. Yes, perfect.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Craig? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, thanks for the question. Yes, indeed. I do think, like I just said now, it's something that is very critical to be able to generate that kind of income. But again, it's important to make sure that you're staying very close to your mission, like Craig has just said. So ideally, it should be something that kind of flows from. So, for instance, the trainings that you might do as a result of from donor funding, the trainings you might do for like your beneficiaries. If you do have those kinds of training expertise in house, you could consider offering those kind of training sessions, maybe to other nonprofits or to other actors for a particular fee. You could also consider creating like a course that captures your particular expertise in a way that makes it accessible, and then putting it up on some of these other online hosting courses, these hosting websites, for instance, from Seller to Marvin, I think, and other ones. You could consider putting that up as well, to allow enough other organizations to be able to take advantage of that unique approach that you use. I recall a couple of courses that were created, although this wasn't for, I think it was free at the time, but that was when I was at Search for Common Ground. I know they did like this course with USAIP on the common ground approach to, I think, religious engagement, something like that. It wasn't paid. I think it was offered free. But that's kind of like the idea that I'm suggesting of seeing how you can kind of put together your expertise in a training program and actually be able to offer that to organize to the public for, like I said, a reasonable fee. The idea is for you to be able to. It shouldn't be something that is totally different from what you already do. And you could also consider creating selling products as well, some ebooks. You could consider putting together merchandise from the work that you do and making it available for people to be able to purchase, all of those kinds of things. So there are also consultancies that you can do as that you can offer as a nonprofit as well, to key stakeholders around that is still related to your mission. It's Yeah. So of course, the benefit is you being, first of all, institutionalizing what you do, and then also able to. I feel like it's a way to also democratize access to your expertise. Even number one, enable a lot more organizations to be able to pitch in and leverage what you have to even drive more impact. So it could also be like a train the trainer model kind of, where other organizations are able to take advantage of how you are, how you are
I think we lost you the last part, Allwell, but I think that's really helpful. Um, can you hear me, Allwell? Let me see if you can. Again, apologies everyone for the technical challenges. It happens, part of life, even in the 21st century. Allwell, let me know if you can hear me. So while we're waiting to see, I did put Perplexity. I mean, we do a lot of work with AI tools and teach courses on this, AI for Impact. So I just did a quick search on Perplexity, using some of their models, and I put a link in here which has some useful resources for organizations. So African Women's Development Fund, West African NGO Network, West African Civil Society Center, and then just some good links. So and then obviously Civicus is. Hold on, it's coming back in. Let me just hide. Can you hear me, Alma? Oops, hold on. I'm just trying to find which is the.
Can you hear me, Craig?
Yes, you get special reward for dealing with technical challenges.
Apologies. Is it good
But
now?
it's okay. Yes. So I was just saying,
Okay, great.
I put in a link, a quick search on Perplexity, which you can see in LinkedIn. I'll put it in the show notes with some resources. And
Okay.
we do a lot of work with AI, and we do teach courses on Maven, and you can also take courses, and also for upskilling, Humanitarian Leadership Academy has lots of free courses, and connected to Save the Children, Acumen Academy, Philanthropy University, and then all the major MOOC providers, so edX and LinkedIn Learning and Coursera. Some of those will have really good things on diversifying income and NGO, and some places will charge a lot of money, and other places not. And always, just because it's free doesn't mean it's not good. It can be really good, and just because it's expensive doesn't mean it's good. I mean, always do your research. So I'll I want to be respectful of time. So two or three more questions, and we'll start wrapping up. The first is for someone who wants to work
Okay.
at the intersection of business development, fundraising, and impact. How do you find jobs, and what are like the career paths like, and what are the wonderful things about working at this intersection, and what are the frustrations?
Um, can you hear me, Craig?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. So one way to find jobs is to like really hold Craig very closely. He's been very helpful to my job search over the last 5 years. So yeah, consider joining his PCDN community, and then you can have access to like a ton of jobs coming through, particularly in terms of impact investing. I think it's really exciting. Impact investing. I mean, working at that intersection that you mentioned. In fact, for me, I think that's something I'm looking to get into a lot more. Seeing how I can work within that intersection and simultaneously support nonprofits and social enterprises. Because now more than ever before, I'm thinking there's a bigger role for social enterprises to play in Africa's development. Seeing that most NGOs are hamstrung basically by this issue with the US government funding, it does mean that for organizations that are able to earn profit and also simultaneously support social impact, they might be the ones to like really champion the development on the continent rather than NGOs. So I think, yeah, you want to be part of a couple of communities for impact investing. I know there's the Gene. Craig, that's the GIIN one. Maybe Craig can put a link to it in the chat.
The
There's
global
Gene that's
impact
very
and
helpful in,
yeah, it's the global
yeah,
impact investing
investing.
network.
Exactly. Yeah. So they are constantly, it's a community basically. You get to improve your skills in impact investing and also get to access jobs as well. I think Craig also has like a couple of curated curated opportunities in terms of impact investing, maybe like job communities and then websites that you can check out. But I think in terms of like the skills you would need, it would be helpful if you also have some business management or business administration skills, just really being able to understand a lot more of the investment side in terms of deal making, in terms of due diligence, analyzing opportunities, and yeah, figuring out doing analysis on like what kind of social enterprises might be best for you to support and understanding their profitability, all of those things. Again, it's also helpful if you have a strong understanding of international development as well. So anything from like a master's in international development or like tons of experience working in international in the NGO space would also be helpful to complement you in that respect. Then yeah, a lot more. I think it's good to also be in touch with like the current realities, the landscape, maybe the business landscape for whatever region it is you might be considering. So let's say if you're in West Africa or East Africa, and then you wanted to work within that sector in that space, you want to keep a pulse on activities that happen in that region, deals that are being made, key actors that are coming up. Because what I see in like a lot of impact investing jobs, I saw opportunities. There are a couple of I think companies you should follow. Acumen is really great. They are great in giving you in building capacity on impact investing. I know there's a course on patient capital, and then a lot of stuff on social enterprises. Acumen is a great, and then all of their courses are totally free. So and then it takes a couple of weeks. There's fundraising, there's business models for social enterprise, incredible courses. Then they do a lot of impact investing themselves. So I know they've also been doing some recruitment, I think in Lagos, on like investment associates, investment managers, and all of those things. So and then they also do a lot of work in East Africa as well. So they're working both in West and East Africa. I want to keep an eye out on for that particular company. And then yeah, I guess like if you belong to those kind of networks. But what I would say is, and one thing that I see from like recruitment for those kind of opportunities is they usually want you to have a strong network in the impact investing community or in terms of social enterprises or for startups. So depending on what your background is, if you're looking at like impact investing in healthcare or in education, it's helpful if you begin to get familiar with like the key actors within that space, the deals that are being made, the funding opportunities, the funding series that various organizations are getting, all of those kinds of stuff. Okay, maybe stop here and then turn it to Craig.
So Louis, great suggestions, and I put in the LinkedIn chat lots of
Craig, I hope you
resources.
heard me.
Yes, perfect. So I put in the LinkedIn chat lots of the places Allwell was talking about, and also for upskilling. And Louise, who asked one of the questions, also mentioned donor-assisted funds, donor-advised funds, which are basically places where people with a certain amount of wealth, not necessarily the most wealthy, put aside money that's invested, and then they can give it out in charitable contributions without setting up their own foundations. And there's a lot of money sitting in, mostly in the US, maybe in other countries. And there's some organizations that are trying to work on this. We invested in one startup that's doing that, but if anyone has suggestions. But again, there's no magic solutions. And then we'll finish up with three questions. One is for anyone who
Okay.
wants to work around business development. What are some skills that you recommend you've already talked a lot about skills, but what are some things you recommend people work on either developing or strengthening? Because with AI and the world and USA basically shutting down, things are changing. So you've talked about finance, impact investing, strong writing skills, project management skills, but anything else you'd recommend, whether it's for the jobs of today or the ones that might develop in the future at this intersection? What are some other
Mhm.
skills?
Mhm. Thanks, Greg. I think because of the layoffs that are happening in the thousands, typically business development teams were already understaffed normally. Most times you would want one person to be the grant writer, the donor strategist, the capture, the donor researcher, all of those kinds of stuff. The person doing capture work and all of those kinds of things, the proposal manager, etc. I think going forward, there might be a bit more request for more like STTs in terms of fundraising. Yeah, like short-term consultants or part-time consultants that can provide fundraising work. Um, because these NGOs will be looking to get support in getting funding back, but they might not be willing to carry on maybe full time because of what the cost of what that implies. What that means is, I think at this point you should be working towards becoming a generalist in fundraising rather than a specialist. So typically, in terms of fundraising, most people might focus on the ability to write grants only. But now I think you need to develop competencies in thinking strategically around fundraising. So kind of like what myself and Craig have been saying in terms of end income, what other kind of out of the box options can the non-profits that you're serving, maybe as a consultant or as a full-time staff, what other funding options can they take advantage of? Yeah, what kind of end income models might be best for them? How do they diversify their funding? So basically, I think you should start thinking of how you can support in designing fundraising strategies that are adaptive, that are agile, and then also being able to implement those fundraising strategies. You also need to improve, besides just being able to write grants, the importance of doing research and also excellent writing skills. You want to be thinking around how you can better build donor relationships. Yeah, so how you can better identify donor prospects, how you can qualify them to make sure that they're the right ones for your nonprofits, and then very innovative ways in which you can build relationships with donors, even if it's virtually or in person, but most likely virtually, since they will probably be based anywhere else in the world. So those kind of, if you are able to harness those kind of competencies, and then of course pair it with like your traditional grant writing expertise, I think it will make you a lot more attractive to, because I think now more than ever before there will be more pressure on any fundraising staff that's recruited or any fundraising consultant, because they would expect you to keep an eye out on constantly changing events in the fundraising landscape, and then be able to bring up new ideas besides fundraising, besides grant writing, to be able to secure funding. So one other thing you should do is improve your ability to build relationships, your relationship building skills, your ability to create relationships and cultivate them, and move them to a point where you can also secure funding as well. Then finally, I would say you have to be very organized. You have to be able to manage people generally, because most times even on a grant, you have to be working with like several people from a fundraising. You have to be working with various people, guys on your M&E, guys doing the budget, all of those things. You have to be able to manage them in a way to bring out the best from them when, let's say, you're working on a particular grant. So even if you have to be able to manage up people that are your superiors, manage those that are your level, and those that are below you, to be able to get the best out of them in your fundraising. Then I think finally it will be helpful if you can build multilingual skills, because then you're a lot more attractive if you can pick up another language. If you are somewhere anywhere in Africa, maybe French might be helpful based on wherever it is your organization might be working in, or Spanish, or anywhere wherever you're in. Just try to cultivate another language. It will give you the edge. Over to you, Craig.
Can you share a little bit what type of services Travai Ensemble does, and how people get in contact, what your process is?
Mhm. Thanks a lot. So, a travail, and it's actually a French word, and I noticed that everybody, including Craig, has not been pronouncing it correctly. So, it's travail ensemble. It is a French phrase that means working together. And really, it's a promise to accompany African NGOs across both Anglophone and Francophone speaking Africa to support them on their journey to financial sustainability. So, what we're trying to do is shift the power to them to ensure that they can continue to operate and continue to make impact for their beneficiaries. We do this in basically 5 ways. First is grant writing. We offer a grant writing retainership where we identify the opportunities that are best for you. We create high quality proposals and ensure that you're able to secure that funding. We agree on a particular number of grants on a monthly basis and we work towards it. Usually the retainership is either 6 months or 1 year. The second thing we do is fundraising strategy development. So we help African NGOs design adaptive 2 to 3 year fundraising strategies that ensure that you're able to work in a coordinated way to achieve your fundraising goals and make sure that it's something that also aligns with your organizational strategy as well. The third thing we do is donor research. So we help figure out which kinds of organizations around the world, whatever type of organization they are. So from high net worth individuals, foundations, corporations, what kind of organizations will be interested in funding your work. So we figure out what their interests are, who they are currently funding. Then we create like a customized entry point for your African NGO to begin to build a relationship with them. And the fourth thing we do is fundraising training. So we train on various aspects of fundraising. So from grant writing to individual giving, running fundraising campaigns, building relationships with donors, and income models, all of those kinds of stuff. Then finally, we provide donor advisory services. We're trying to make the fundraising system a lot more equitable and transparent to empower African NGOs. So we help donors, both African and international donors, to design calls for proposals, screen grantees, create capacity building programs as well for grantees, and then conduct research on the fundraising landscape to shed more light on how the ecosystem can get better. So yeah, you can get in touch with us either by reaching out to me on LinkedIn or reaching out to Travail Ensemble, the page as well on LinkedIn, sending us a message or emailing me as well at allwell.akhigbe@travailensemble.com. If you check the show notes, I think Craig might put it up there for you. Well, I guess the easiest way would just to reach out to me on LinkedIn or send us a message as well at the company account. Over
Thank
to you,
you,
Craig.
Allwell. And I studied French for a million years, so I mean, it's my worst language, so I apologize for the horrible. And I've worked in Paris a few times, so I apologize. The last
No
question
problem.
has nothing to do with work, and yes, this will all be in the show notes. Um, what is a movie? Actually, two last questions. So one is, what do you recommend? You've talked about PCDN, but other, whether it's LinkedIn groups, newsletters, networks, online or in person, that you just recommend, and I put in a lot of people that I recommend others follow on LinkedIn, both for jobs and upskilling opportunities, but anywhere else you go to find the news or the opportunities or the challenges, like favorite subscriptions, newsletters, podcasts.
I like Alliance Magazine. I like it a lot. I like it because it's a philanthropy news outlet that provides more diversified coverage of the global south. That's why I think when I compare it to other ones I use like DevX and Inside Philanthropy and other ones like that. I also like that Alliance Magazine gives like a free scholarship or free subscription to African NGO professionals, basically. So for it, it's a free digital subscription. So once you sign up to it with your registration details, you get access to all of the information on the website. So both their quarterly newsletters or not newsletters, quarterly, I don't know, magazines, and then the latest news and all of that. It really broadens my horizons when I read it, and I like that it's a lot more global south. Um, yeah, it's a lot. It's produced the narratives there are a lot. They come from the global south rather than just the global north. Then of course you can use DevX as well. DevX is like one of the preeminent ones, but like I said, it's a lot more Western based or Western originated coverage basically. I also like, well, I think at the moment, um, yeah, I wouldn't say so many communities that I'm in right now, like actively participating in at the moment. But I mean, there's Society for International Development. I'm subscribed to them, the one in Washington D.C. I from time to time participate in their fireside chats and also like their career events as well. It's virtual, it's helpful. But in terms of maybe fundraising, the ones I like to listen to two particular podcasts I think are really helpful. And one is Grant Writing and Funding by Holly Rustic, and I like this a lot because it focuses on the business of grant writing. So it's also like very helpful to those of us that are fundraising consultants. You get tips on how to run the business successfully and how to like really promote your services and all of that. But again, how to navigate challenges like what's happening right now and how to get better in every aspect of fundraising. So I like to listen to it from time to time. There's also another one by Teresa Hoff. Those are like my two major podcasts apart from Social Change Career podcast that I listen to. So you might want to check.
Great.
At the moment, reading Thrive by Ariana Huffington. Thrive, the third metric in terms of how to win. I like it because it slows me down. Fundraising gets very intense and there's a lot of burnout involved in it as well. So Thrive just really reminds me that hey, that's not the only thing that's not the most important thing in life. I have my kids, my wife, my family, my other interests, and all of those kinds of things. And then the need to pause, to put the brakes on from time to time and rest. I enjoy life, meditate, and all of that. So Thrive is a really great book for me that I'm currently reading. I'm looking to put into practice this up.
Wonderful. So I will put all those resources, or as many as we can, in
Yeah,
the
correct.
show notes. And yeah, so I think we'll wrap up here, but thank you, everyone. We had quite a few people. We had technical challenges, but we still have a good amount of
Okay.
people. So just as we started off with, we'll edit out the technical interruptions. This will be live as an audio podcast the 24th. Our first episode of season 14 will be live tomorrow. There's 170 plus episodes. Please consider sharing and rating. Please follow Allwell and Travail Ensemble in LinkedIn, PCDN, and again, it's a brutal time, and I wish that the world and political and economic leaders would put people on planet first, but we're unfortunately a long way off from that. And I live in Colombia, and we're one of the largest recipients in the Western Hemisphere of U.S. aid, and obviously lots of people are being infected, and tens of thousands of people are losing their jobs around the world too. It's going to be a really hard market, and there's no magic solution. I mean, unless other governments or
Mhm.
philanthropists got together and said we're going to create an emergency fund, both for the millions of people who are going to suffer and the tens of thousands who lose their jobs. I have not seen evidence of that happening. I wish it would. Um, and thank you, Allwell, for sharing so much of your wisdom and insights, both on fundraising and diversifying and the challenges of the sector. I mean, maybe we'll do a future episode just on all the challenges in the sector and the bizarreness, because it's not every
Mhm.
sector has bizarreness, but there's the dance of funding is such a bizarre thing, um, and there's a lot of power relations involved, which we didn't get into
Yeah.
too much, but that's a whole nother. And then if everyone, if people haven't followed Edgar Villanueva, who runs the term of the exact decolonizing wealth project and book, he's Native American U.S. and partially through his second edition of his book, but he does a lot of great work on decolonizing philanthropy. So I'd encourage people to, and there's lots of good work on that. So again, thank you, Allwell, and you get a special. I mean, one, super appreciate you sharing your wisdom, but you get special award for technical challenges happen for coming back in, and thank you everyone for listening and going through the technical challenges. And again, the show notes will be lots of great wisdom here. So have a great afternoon, and thank you everyone, and thank you especially
Mhm.
Allwell.
Thanks a lot, Craig. Thanks everyone for